lesson 34. We continue with the philosophy of the Kleshas according to Patanjali. Chapter 2, Sutra 9. Abhinivesha is the strong desire for life which dominates even the learned or the wise. This is the final klesha, fear, abhinivesha. What this sutra is telling us is that everybody is subject to this klesha, no matter how intelligent you are, how educated you are, how wise you are. Fear is a dominating instinct to survive. We have created a world of safety around us if you compare it with 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. But that instinct is still inside us. It's very easily triggered, and it influences everything that we do in life. More importantly, it is the cause of not doing things in life. Because whenever we ask ourselves, shall I do this or that? Unknowingly, subconsciously, fear kicks in and presents us with all kinds of doom scenarios. Everything that can go wrong. And so most people prefer to stay in their comfort zone, in their safety bubble. Just because possibly something could go wrong. If you're comfortable with that, fine. Many people are. I told you several times that when I look around, I look at my family, friends, and I compare with how we have all evolved or not evolved since, say, 30 years ago. In most people, I don't see change other than just aging. Because people are paralyzed by fear, which they do not recognize, of course. And if they do recognize it, they will allow it to guide them. Because they do not have a crown chakra where they can oversee. They can rise above the fear and rationalize it and see that it is not rational or it is not applicable in that particular situation. For us as yogis, this becomes more and more part of our functioning because the crown chakra gradually opens up. You develop insight, including insight in fear, your fear. And when that happens, you also develop this ability to challenge your fear. Instead of allowing fear to paralyze you, to keep you from doing important things in life, sometimes life-changing things, you start to play with fear. You start to experiment. It becomes more like a game. Of course, you don't take unnecessary risk. That would be foolish. But on the other hand, it's also foolish to always be paralyzed by fear, not allowing you to go anywhere or to undertake anything of any significance in life. I have played with my fears all my life. Even before yoga, I did it, maybe subconsciously, but I played with fear. Challenging fear. It's how I got my first kiss. Can you imagine? I was 13 years old, madly in love with a girl in the first grade of grammar school. And you know, that's all very playful, very innocent. And one day we were in the swimming pool, and she liked me very much too. But it was a children's love. You go to the playground, to the fairground where you take a ride in a roller coaster or so, or in the Ferris wheel. But fear froze me. She wanted to kiss me, I wanted to kiss her, but we both didn't have the courage. So one day it was in the summer vacation, we were in the swimming pool, and then I challenged myself. But it was a very funny situation. I forced myself to ask her for a kiss, but then immediately I turned around, dove into the pool, and I started swimming not straight underwater, but I made a turn so that nobody could follow me where I went. If I look back at it now, it's so funny. But I did, and it felt good. I had overcome my fear, and I did get a kiss. Later, when I had started practicing yoga, a whole new life opened up after some years of darkness. And of course that felt good. Yoga makes you feel good, especially when you come out of a bad condition. It just makes you feel so alive. But you are also confronted with your weak spots, your weaknesses. And shyness has always been my weakness. I've come a long way in dealing with that, but at that time I came to the conclusion that to overcome shyness, I had to throw myself in front of the wolves, as we say. There's a Dutch expression where you say you throw yourself in front of the wolves. In the same way as I threw myself in front of the wolves asking for a kiss. And I realized that I had to create situations where I'm forced to interact with people. I went back to school, adult education, mainly to be among people. That was the primary goal. And the secondary goal was, of course, education. I studied, my vision was to be self-employed, so not dependent on a boss, a manager, what have you. So that was my vision of my future, to be eventually to run my own business one way or another. And I realized that it would be handy if you study some business administration, that you know how to run your own administration and general economy. Then the next step I took was I started working in a health food shop, in an organic food shop, where you're dealing with customers all the time. A shop that was half the size of this studio, so small shop, and your main task really is to deal with customers. And I loved it, I thrived. And people that felt my energy mistakenly thought that I might be the owner of that shop. I was just a part-time employee. But because of the way that I handled things, the way that I dealt with customers and so on. That is how you deal with fear. Not accepting that it paralyzes you through doubt, through worry, through fear. Paralyzes. Then, around the same time, when taking my brothers to southern France, we were there, 4 of us, 4 brothers from the same family. And 2 of them I brought there to kick the habit of drug abuse for one and alcohol abuse for the other. We spent there a month, and one day we entered into a fairground where you can shoot, you can throw balls, you can take a ride of this and that. There was also an installation where you could do a bungee jump. Very expensive at that time, 200 French francs, which now seems nothing, but for me as a part-time worker, having shelved a lot of money out for the trip in itself, that was a lot of money. But, of course, I was intrigued. Why? Because of the fear. You see that installation there, somebody is being brought up to the platform, jumps down with this elastic cord, just stopping the person just before the cushion. They had an air cushion, so not just bare ground. And it was just something I had to do. Just like the other challenges I felt I had to overcome one way or another, I felt I had to do that. I felt I couldn't, it became an obsession. And I asked my brothers, hey, how about we take a bungee jump? And all said, nah, not interested. Of course, they were not interested out of fear, which they don't want to admit. For me, functioning from the crown chakra, overseeing, rising above the fear, just like we talked about with ego just in the previous session, the moment that you oversee it, rise above it, you become conscious of it. And the moment I become conscious of something that scares me, I want to explore it. I want to see if that fear is reasonable and rational, real, and I want to see if I can negotiate that fear, if I can deal with that fear. But having never done anything like that before, it was terrifying to even think. In your mind, subconsciously, you start creating the most horrible scenarios where the cord breaks, or they make the wrong calculation, or just, something fails and you drop dead. So then you do the same that you do when you go into an airplane. You tell yourself the chance that something goes wrong is there, but it's so small, so incredibly small, it's not even a big risk. But then again, it is very much against human nature that you just jump off a platform into the deep, even knowing that you have that cord attached to your legs. It's still a big, big scare. I had to do it. It took me, maybe my awareness of time was warped because of the intensity, but I think that it took me about an hour walking around the fairground, doing this and that. But I was mainly occupied with the idea that I had to do that bungee jump. It took me about an hour to convince myself to actually do it. And then I walked up to the window and bought a ticket. And I went up and I jumped. And I wish that I had 200 more francs because I wanted to do a second time. Because I knew if I do it again, I will enjoy it much more than the first time. The first time was an experiment, something I had to do to overcome the fear. The second time, it would have been really fun, having experienced it overcome the fear, that would have been just much more interesting experience. I didn't have enough money, so I didn't, but I was it's so empowering, really so empowering experience it's the reason why after 30 some years, I can still very vividly recall, even see in my imagination exactly the fairground and the circumstances, and just so vividly remember every detail of it. It just changed my life. That experience just changed my life. Fear. Overcoming fear. Don't be stupid, don't be foolish, don't take unnecessary risks. Also, do not allow fear to rule your life, because that is what it does with 99.9% of all people in the world. And it is keeping us from developing into the best version of ourselves that we can be. It has led to what I'm doing today. Having left my country was scary. Deciding to stay, not to go back, scary. Giving up all the comforts of living in a country with one of the best social security systems in the world, that can be scary, overwhelming. Even I just decided to give up my Dutch nationality and take on a Korean nationality. And people do not understand why I did that. Because they cannot think from the perspective of a yogi. It has brought all kinds of good things. And what the future brings, I have noticed that if you dare to do the things that you fear the most, dread the most, there is a higher power there behind you that helps you, that guides you, and that rewards you for having the courage to do the things that you dread the most. That is initially a philosophy, a theory, but many years of living life in that way, ever since I started practicing yoga, has proven that it really works. So much so that I sometimes think that I have become a priest who is preaching some kind of religion about some almighty God. Of course, you know from the way that I teach, it doesn't work like that, but in reality, we know now that energy corresponds, vibrates, and attracts other energies. If your energy is based on fear, it will lead to paralysis. It will lead to tamas. If your energy is based on courage, is expanding, it attracts expanding vibrations, courageous vibrations. Good things start to happen. Constructive things start to happen. It is a wonderful journey, especially when you start to notice that it's not just a philosophy or a theory, but it actually really works. Do good and good will come to you. Do bad in the same theme and bad will come to you. And when you are conscious of that, it's clear everybody would want good things to happen. Now you realize you are in control. Stop engaging, going along with negative things and bad things that surround all of us, and more choose to engage with good things and positive things, which are often more difficult to go along with. But it is a choice, and it is a choice that comes with a reward. Sutra 10. These, the subtle ones, can be reduced by resolving them backward into their origin. This is about the Kleshas, of course. Kleshas, according to Patanjali, can be resolved by reducing them, resolving them backward to their origin. We have talked about this before. When you're struck by fear, you go back to the previous klesha, hatred. Being stuck in hatred is also not a good thing. You use it as a tool, but you cannot stay stuck there because we know it's a negative emotion that poisons us. So we need to resolve it back to the next previous klesha, which is attachment. We also know that attachment, we can use it as a tool, but we should not stay stuck. We talked about raga. It keeps people imprisoned in an emotion, good or bad, which you then resolve back to egoism. Then egoism leads us back to ignorance, which then becomes wisdom. Avidya becomes vidya. Why? Out of ignorance, you went down the ladder. Out of ignorance, we ended up functioning on ego, leading to egoism, which leads to attachment, which then leads to the frustration, hatred, and eventually the final station where most people stay stuck is fear. But now you have studied, practiced yoga, you developed a higher consciousness, and you developed insight in how this actually works, psychologically, how you function. And you say, I know how this works. I'm stuck in fear. I need to generate anger. I need to not allow myself to be stuck here. Put my foot down. Be stubborn. Anger. Like the drill sergeant in the army. And you walk back that process, and because you do that consciously, what led to the problem in the first place, ignorance, leading to egoism, attachment, hatred, fear, the final station, you resolve that back to their origin. Along the way, you have developed insight into how you got there. And that is how avidya becomes vidya, how ignorance becomes or leads to insight. So generally, normal people do not function like this because they are functioning mainly subconsciously. You, on the other hand, little by little, but more and more, develop consciousness and start, therefore, doing things more and more consciously, mindfully. And that is what allows you to turn ignorance into wisdom. That is, however, not a one-time process. I think I explained that last week already, but it's important that you realize this. Now, I remember very clearly in the beginning of my development as a yoga practitioner, you have these wonderful moments where you feel to be on top of things because you have developed insight. You have epiphanies where you develop crucial insights, where you understand important things about yourself that you have never been aware of before. And sometimes that can lead a little bit to arrogance, where you think you know it all. But interestingly, the next step is that you realize you know nothing at all. And that is when you smile at yourself. That is where you realize the enormity of life in general. That is where you develop humility, where you become humble, realizing that there is still, you have achieved something, but there is still so much more to do, still so much more to understand. So first you think that this process, walking back the Kleshas, bringing them back to wisdom, that you're done with your task. But it only means that you have resolved your ignorance in one particular aspect of your life. So it will happen again. At some point you will be confronted with some aspect of your life where you have not developed consciousness yet, and subconsciously, without knowing it, you will descend down that ladder again, end up in fear. And it sometimes takes a while before you realize it. It can take a year or two that you get stuck in a certain situation before you realize it. But then you realize it and you walk it back and you solve the issue. You solve your fear, you walk it back, and you have developed yet again a new piece of awareness of something that you were ignorant of before. Interestingly, with time passing and you going more and more through that process of ending up down the ladder in fear and then resolving that back to wisdom, is that you become more and more skillful at it. While in the beginning of your development, it may take a year, sometimes more, before you realize that you're stuck. I've been stuck for years. Not even 1 or 2, but 6 or 7, sometimes. But you become more and more skillful at recognizing that you're stuck, to the point that it just takes a couple of weeks before you realize it. You become more and more skillful at bringing it back to its origin. It becomes part of your life to function like that. You don't even have to really think very hard about it anymore, like you have to in the beginning. It becomes integrated into your daily life. Sutra 11. Their active modifications are to be suppressed by meditation. Active modifications? What does that mean? That is when Kleshas attract or are attracted to you. When samskaras awaken, become a fritti or a vibration of energy, you will attract something from your environment. That is an active modification. The samskara, triggered by something that is happening around you, or a memory, leads to a mood, an emotion, which technically is a vibration of energy, that then attracts the same kind of energy from the environment, leading to you undergoing misery in the form of a conflict or an emotion that you are suffering from. So that is the modification, active modification. The answer here is that to deal with that, we need to meditate. That has been the conclusion ever since I started practicing yoga. Every time that I got stuck, and believe me that there has been many, many times, I always came back to the same conclusion. I have to be more diligent with my meditation. Because every time when I meditate, there are no problems. Because problems only exist because you do not see their essence. You get stuck and you don't know what to do. The moment that you sit down and you become completely calm and your energy is circulating, you see the essence of the problem you are looking at easily, which also means that the solution to that problem easily presents itself. You know what to do to deal with that issue. So throughout life, ever since I started practicing yoga, life doesn't stop. It's not that you can just practice yoga every day, all day. And in the beginning stages, when it has not much integrated into your daily life, you need to practice regularly to keep that energy up, to keep your consciousness open. But there are so many things to deal with. In the beginning especially, when you have not really determined your own destiny yet, you're busy basically with dealing with your past, with family ties. You're dealing with the job that you have to work just to pay the bills, a job that you, in your heart, deep in your heart, you don't want to be there, but you have no choice. You have to pay the bills. So you continue doing that. You become distracted from your practice, you get stuck again. Only to dig up your meditation cushion from your closet and sit down, because that is where all the pieces of the puzzle fall into place, and the problem is not a problem anymore because you know what to do. And it is in that moment of silence of your meditation that you see that. No effort at all. Meditation does not mean doing anything complicated with your eyes closed. Just sit there in silence, like you do here in class, listening to nada. You can read, if you read, it's only 2 paragraphs, or 3 paragraphs, but not so long. That's my personal experience there described. Sutra 12. Why do we need to abolish the Kleshas? The reservoir of karmas which are rooted in Kleshas brings all kinds of experience in the present and future lives. When we are born with a backpack full of karma. It explains why even within one family, different siblings have different characters. And different siblings will develop in very different ways often in life. You would think if they are all born in the same family, the same circumstances, sent to the same school, you would think that they all develop in the same way. To some extent you do have things in common with your other siblings. But each sibling comes with another backpack of karma. And that is what determines their different ways of developing when they grow up and get older. So according to Patanjali and also Buddhist philosophy, life is a valley of tears, which means life is not enjoyable because we are always confronted with suffering, with misery, with conflict. And who wants that? Nobody wants that. It's a very fatalistic view if it is not interpreted correctly, because there are many spiritual people or religious people who say, yes, but God or the Bible or the book says life is misery, so I just have to be miserable all my life and just accept that as a fact. That is a wrong interpretation of this philosophy. The philosophy tells us, yes, out of ignorance, life indeed presents us with a lot of misery. Open your eyes, do the work, your exercises, your meditation, Open your eyes as a result of that consciousness and become aware of how this actually works. And if you know how it works, you can actually avoid it. This Sutra, Sutra 12, is telling us why we need to get rid of those Kleshas. That is because if we don't, we will indeed continue to suffer misery all our lives. And not only this life, because Buddhism and yoga are based on the idea that you reincarnate. So every karma that you do not resolve in this life will be in your backpack in the next life where you are born. So you can try to avoid it in this life. Some people commit suicide to avoid their karma, thinking that they can solve a problem in that way. What they do not realize is that ignoring the problem, the karma, doesn't make it go away. If you commit suicide now, it will just come back in your next life. So instead of committing suicide, better do effort to solve it now, so that you do not have it in your backpack the next time when you reincarnate. Or if you don't believe in reincarnation, you solve the problem now instead of ignoring it or avoiding it, so that you can improve the quality of your life, reduce the amount of suffering and misery that you are experiencing. You see in the second paragraph, when you purify yourself more and more, your samskaras become clearer and clearer. Because you become conscious, but also because of your increasing consciousness, you slowly but certainly get rid of characteristics that lead to suffering, failure, misery. Samskaras. That is what purification means here. But the text means that when you get purer, the first result is that you actually might experience more suffering. That sounds a bit contradictory, because you practice yoga, you expect to reduce your misery and your suffering, but this is what happens, and this is the reason why becoming purer, having less karma, less kleshas, experiencing less kleshas, the thing is, you only get there through increased consciousness. If you're not conscious of suffering, you think you're not suffering. You do not experience life as suffering as long as you do not, or as long as you are not conscious of the suffering. Now you practice yoga, you go to work to reduce the kleshas, and then you realize that actually you're suffering more than before. You want to cry, you feel more unstable, emotional. That is a temporary stage that every yoga practitioner or every spiritual practitioner goes through, and it is simply caused by your increasing consciousness. Although you are on your path to reduce your kleshas, which cause your suffering, although there may be less, you are more aware of them. And that means that you should not give up thinking, oh, I am suffering more, so it didn't work. No, it is actually working. It shows that it's actually working. And if you continue, you will eventually end up suffering less. You just have to go through the storm. And then the storm will die down. Then life becomes better than it never has been before. Because this is a common occurrence in not only yoga practitioners, but all people on spiritual path of one form or another, we call it one of the diseases of the disciple. A disease of the disciple is some form of suffering that actually is caused by our yoga practice. That when that happens, it is important to realize that it is part of your development. It is a developmental stage. So it doesn't last. You must go through it. You will go through it. And you will go through it more efficiently if you do not give up. Keep up your practice. Keep meditating. And if you get stuck, like I got stuck, drop me an email and I will give you some very simple insight in your situation. I'm very good at giving people insight in their situation when they're stuck. Like I dropped Ajita a phone call when I was terribly stuck and desperate. He also gave me a very simple, practical piece of advice that totally changed my life. You always try to do it alone. When you're stuck, when you're desperate, drop me a line. Also, 10 years from now. This is important. As a yoga teacher, I have taken you under my wings and guided you towards increased consciousness, because that is the result of your practice and study here. That means I'm responsible for your development, and I take that very serious. If the course finishes, that does not mean that our connection is finished. If ever someday you have questions, you need some insight, drop me a line. As long as I'm alive, I will respond. I always respond, and I will try to give you some insight. Don't hesitate. Always try to do it alone, because that is where you learn. But if you're stuck and desperate and don't know anymore whether to turn left or right, drop me a line. It's often much simpler than you think. You just don't see it anymore. And I have the ability to see that. And I will give you a kick under your Muladhara chakra through cyberspace, and you can move forward again. You will see. The purifying human being is doomed to atone, which is also called the penance of the ascetic. You know the concept of Judgment Day? Judgment Day in the Bible seems to suggest that if you do bad things in life, at the end of your life, you will come in front of the gates of heaven, where there is Saint Peter. Saint Peter is guarding the gates to heaven, I think. If you have lived a bad life, he will pass judgment on you, and he will send you down to hell. He will not allow you into heaven, he will send you down to hell. That's Judgment Day. Judgment Day, however, does not come at the end of your life. Judgment Day comes the day that you open up your consciousness and become aware of yourself and the life that you have lived. And inevitably, that comes with a can of worms opening up. Inevitably, that comes with memories of things you're not proud of. That is Judgment Day. Judgment Day is the day that you become conscious and realize what you have done. Because some people mistakenly think that Judgment Day is at the end of life when you die. They use that as an excuse for not behaving morally right, morally correct. Because they think, when I die, it doesn't matter anymore. Who cares? But in the meantime, without actually being aware of it, they're suffering every day because of their immoral behavior. So this is, you could call this a disease of the disciple too. Because you become conscious, you will always have to deal with the things that you have done throughout life until the time that you became conscious, and laid a moral foundation with the yamas and the niyamas. How do you deal with that? Do you have to go through life with a bent back, suffering under the sins that you committed? Because some religions actually tell you that you should. There are religious streams where they use whips to torture themselves, thinking that that is how they pay for their sins. That is not the way to deal with that. That is very extreme. How do you deal with your past misdeeds? Because everybody will find them. Should you suffer from them? Feel miserable the rest of your life because of them? Do you know the answer to this question? How do you deal with it? With compassion. You cannot turn back the clock and correct the mistakes of the past. So you must accept, surrender to learn from those events from the past so that you do not make the same mistakes again. You cannot go back and correct it, so it is useless to continue to suffer from it the moment that you actually become conscious of it. 3, realize that you're only human. Yes, I made mistakes, but I have changed my life. I have bettered myself. And from now on, I will continue to make it better. I will continue to try to be a better human being because I became conscious. You will never forget about those experiences, but you have to extend compassion to yourself, accepting that nobody is perfect, including me. Everybody is only human, imperfect, including me. And if you can extend that compassion to yourself, you'll be able to extend that to the imperfect people around you, who maybe still are not conscious and continue to do wrong. That doesn't make it acceptable, but you understand that it is based on ignorance. They don't know better. Although not acceptable, you have compassion for them. In the same way that you must have compassion and forgive yourself. So that is how you deal with that burden when you become conscious of the past. everybody, no exception, will have a backpack full of misery, memories of things we are not proud of, things that we have done or said that led to hurting other people or damaging other people. We cannot turn back the clock, correct the misdeeds, but we can learn from it, avoid the same mistakes in the future, and we can develop compassion. Very important human quality. Quality especially of the spiritual person. Good. Questions? Okay, let's have a short break then.